Right then, so let's dive right in. So today I want to talk about a situation you may or may not have heard about in Peckham, so the Peckham Incident, and I've been seeing a lot of videos on TikTok, YouTube, etc. Making a lot of racial comments towards Asian people. Before we get there, let's see how it started. So, from what I understand, what I can see, the situation in Peckham. A black lady was trying to do a return on some hair products. Apparently, you couldn't get a refund. A store credit was offered, from what I understand. The lady wasn't happy. It's important to note it's a 31-year-old lady, so this isn't a young woman or a child. So she's coming for the refund. That's not been granted. The policy outlines that essentially you can get a refund, which is a credit note, which is what was offered. The woman wasn't happy, so she started to walk out and exit the store with goods that she thought was fair for her to take in exchange for her not being able to get a refund. So the shop owner, what he did is obviously tried to restrain her and obviously stop her from leaving the shop with the goods. And then, as you could, if you've already seen, this is where the situation started to escalate. So initially, it was trying to get in front, stop from leaving the store. One thing led to another. It started to get violent, and the lady obviously wanted to leave the store. There's a bit of commotion. It can obviously be perceived as quite embarrassing as well. So if you think about maybe what was going through the woman's mind at the time, is that there's a bit of a scene over some items. Am I being called a thief, etc. This has obviously not gone the way she wanted. It got physical. From what I could see, the woman put hands on the shopkeeper first, and then it escalated. You can see there's a basket, that was just thrown on his head, etc. The basket actually broke, so there must have been quite a lot of force. Here's the part where everyone focuses on and dismisses everything that happened prior to this. So in his attempt to restrain her, at one point he has put his hands around her neck in an attempt to hold her back, albeit very briefly, but it did happen. Push comes to shove, it escalated. There's a commotion, there's a scene, people are kicking off, asking questions, getting their phones out, as people do this day and age. Police were called. Ultimately, she was arrested. The shopkeeper, he dropped charges from what I understood. But nevertheless, the situation happened and it's not good. Let's just break it down, okay? So why is race being brought into this? That's what I want to know, right? There's shopkeepers of all different races, colours. What's the relevance there? He sells black women's products, from what I understand, predominantly like the I don't know what the products are, but like wigs and hair care and stuff like that. But yeah, so his customer base is predominantly the black community. So it wouldn't make sense for a shopkeeper to set a business to have their clientele for a race he doesn't like. So my biggest issue is, irrespective of if it was a black woman or an Asian shopkeeper or a black shopkeeper and an Asian woman, why are we straight jumping into the race card? It's like the easiest defense mechanism that anyone can pull. And it's quite pathetic. It's quite pathetic in that regard. Violence, as we know, is never the answer. And, I guess, I would kind of rebuttal that and say violence, is last resort. But, in these situations, you've got adults, not children. Peckham, from what I understand, it's not a very, it's in an impoverished area, isn't it? So I guess, from the customer's perspective, a broken goods item, that money would probably be worth more to her than, the average person. Again, just speculating. But nevertheless, the situation got to where it's got to. But who's in the right and who's in the wrong? Where do we draw the line? I think a big issue in the UK is things like theft and all these criminal behaviours and activities, antisocial behaviour. It's, it's not dealt with. It's not, it's not dealt with at all. Essentially, it was in the news a couple of weeks back. Like you had like store workers in the likes of Tesco, Co-op, Sainsbury's, etc., talking about they don't feel safe. And I think what's quite interesting is here is because this is obviously the shop owner, not an employee. The goods that are being stolen, they directly affect him, don't they? They come out of his pocket. So he's going to feel a certain way when people are stealing out of his store. That's his business. That's what he does to feed his family. So it's quite interesting. The big chains that I've mentioned, they don't feel safe. And what happens if you stop a thief, you put hands on them or restrain them in whichever way you choose to, right? It'll always be, you assaulted me, you did this, you did that. And I think the bigger issue is in the UK, the way it's governed and policed, it's so poor. It's so poor. And, it almost gives, the community of the UK in its entirety the mindset of, if I don't have my way, I can do this, or I can get away with that, I can steal this. Petty crimes are not being dealt with, and this is what's obviously escalating to bigger crimes as well. And it encourages as well, if you're, someone who knows that you can get away with stealing goods, that, the state of the economy is not the greatest. There's a lot of poverty and it's only going one way. It's really not helping the cause. But back to the original point, the situation happened and both parties are to be accounted for. It's easy to say what you would have done and what you should have done and what you could have done. But the bottom line is, unless you're in that situation, it's hard to be, it's easy to be a backseat driver and say, I wouldn't have done this, I would have done that. If you're there in that situation, right, only you, when you're there, can say what you would and wouldn't do. Some people obviously might have a bit more of a holistic approach or conservative. Some people might, look to restrain and stop people from stealing goods, which is obviously what's happened in this situation. These things need to be dealt with correctly. Saying, what's happened since then, right, I think is absolutely disgusting. So there's a lot of talks of, the BLM movement, doing protests and things of that nature, which is absolutely fine. However, the narrative I'm not so happy with. It's not a race thing because an Asian shop owner stopped or attempted to stop a black woman. It's got nothing to do with race. It's quite simple. If you don't get your way, it doesn't mean you can break the law and do as you please. And when things don't go your way, you throw out the race card, you start protesting in the manner that it's done. And also the type of, comments and letters and messages that are on the shop shutter in regards to Asian people, absolutely disgusting. So if you're a part of that community and this is the message that you're portraying, right, which is absolutely vile, completely racist, right, which just blows my mind, because the accusations are it's a racist incident, yet all of there's no evidence to support that. Yet all the protesters, you can see this on YouTube, all the comments, I'm not even going to sort of, talk through what they are, they're just disgusting and vile in terms of what they say, specifically to the Asian community and the shop owner. That's racist, right? Absolutely, I don't condone violence. For me, violence is, as a man, it's last resort, okay? And violence never ends well, right? But we need to think about what the greater issue is. And it's behavior, isn't it? It's conduct. It's, how do we, represent our community? How do we act accordingly? How do we live in a governed society? We're not animals, yet we're living like this. Let's also consider as well, certain parts of the world, right? If you're caught stealing, your hand gets chopped off, right? So, this is how certain parts of the world deal with situations like this, But what it comes down to, I think the greater issue is, it's the country is failing. It is absolutely failing. The way it's policed, the way it's governed, it's causing situations like this. There's no fear in, the average, what we could call them, resident, the average person, let's just say, to not commit crimes because the punishment is essentially non-existent. I think ultimately, in reflection, the incident should never have happened. These situations can be dealt with amicably. You can have, a mature adult conversation and look to resolve this, but you've got to take accountability, and everyone needs to take accountability, whether you're a man or a woman, you're the shop owner, you're a customer, whatever that scenario is. You've got to take accountability for your actions. You've got to look back and say, right, what was my involvement? What could I have done to prevent this? And if we just have the attitude of, right, the situation's happened, someone's, which we're talking about, of course, shop owners obviously tried to stop physically the black customer, the lady trying to do the return. But let's just dismiss all of the facts prior to that. Let's just solely focus on the one point where he had his hands around her neck and make that the narrative and the subject. You're either blind or you're stupid, or you've got an agenda, which I probably think it's the latter. But anyway, I think what we need to do in society, if we want to live civil and not like animals, is 2023, is we need to start by looking in the mirror. Are we a perfect person? Are we doing right? Are we creating situations that might upset someone? Stealing from someone's shop, or taking goods that are not being paid for, it affects someone, doesn't it? If I went to your house, opened your door, if you have a safe, take your money out your safe, or take your computer, or whatever valuables people have, you're not going to be happy, you're going to react in a certain way. So key things, the whole racial narrative, it's not acceptable. It's not a racial incident. Violence, it's never good, but let's just think about prevention over cure, because we're in that cure mindset, and then that mindset is, Asians are racist, they're selling to our community, kick them out, black shop owners. Look, I've got no issues with black shop owners selling black products, as they should, and other communities get involved as well, as they should. But the narrative's completely wrong, completely wrong. Fix the main issue, which the issue always comes from within, okay? Always from within. Look in the mirror, think about what actions you're doing, what implications or what reaction might come from your actions, and then we'll be in a better place. There's no point saying retrospectively this, that, or the other. If there was a situation where it was a random attack, unprovoked, it's a different scenario. But what the media and certain people behind certain protests and campaigns have an agenda, and they like to pick and choose certain parts of the story that supports their narrative. No different than politics and government, but we won't talk about that today. And then push that agenda. So in summary, we just need to take a deep breath, look in the mirror, conduct ourselves in a civil manner. We're adults as well, and words are more powerful, right, than actions in terms of physical actions. You can get, the way the world works these days, you can get more done with words. So perhaps educating yourself on, in this scenario, policies, returns, even good communication, simple soft skills like negotiation. If you're a regular customer, for argument's sake, how about the approach of not going in huffy and puffy, say, look, been for you for years, this has happened, I know you don't do the return, can you make an exception? There's more than one way to skin a cat. But violence leads to violence. If you come in and with you put fuel on fire, you're gonna get more fire. So that would be my thoughts on this situation. But we need to look at ourselves in the mirror and think, right, are we perfect? Have we aggravated the situation? Is there anything we could have done to avoid a situation? And essentially, that's where we need to begin. What doesn't help is pushing an agenda on race and racism, and also, how does it make you look when you're posting all these comments and posters that you stuck on the wall with all these racial slurs and propaganda, it speaks for itself, doesn't it? But yeah, it'll be interesting to get your thoughts if you share my opinion, and yeah, we'll go from there. All right, chop it.